So, it went from there to a variety of things. Colleen and I did together some things in Minnesota, that would enhance the role of people with disabilities. And my enthusiasm level went way up. People remembered my name. People would call me so-and-so, and I began to remember their names. And so when we got into 1988, I don't know how he got here, but a guy by the name of Justin Dart came to Minnesota. And I was starting my campaign against Skip Humphrey, or he was starting his campaign against me because I was in the Senate at the time. And Justin Dart was a funny man who dressed the same way all the time. Obviously came from resources, but I never asked why or what. But his commitment was to resolve all the discrimination against people with disabilities. And he made this little talk in front of a bunch of my supporters in Minnesota in either early '88 or something like that. And then he wrote out a check for $1,000 to my campaign. Now today we don't think anything of that. I mean, rich people are writing checks all the time, that sort of thing. But in those days, it was like, I don't even know the guy, he doesn't really know me. But he saw in me something that I was at the same time seeing in people that he supported. And he wanted to do what became the Americans with Disabilities Act. And he said to the people in the room, Dave will get it done for you. He can get it done for you. Within a relatively short period of time, I got on the Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee, and as well as the Finance, stayed on the Finance, got on HELP. Teddy Kennedy was the chairman. Talked to Kennedy about this, about discrimination, and he said, let's go. And I said, well, what's your plan? And he said, well, I've been doing this, I've been doing that. I too know Ralph Nees, and all this sort of thing, and I know all these people. And of course, Teddy Kennedy does. He knows lots of people. But by then, it's 1989. He said, we need a Democrat. And I got one for you, Tom Harkin, who's a senator from Iowa. And Tom has in his own family, a brother, I think it was, with a disability. So Tom was eager to go. So it became Harkin, Durenberger, and then Kennedy. It was the third officer on the bill. Yeah, Washington's a small town, I guess. It's in this kind of a sense, and in those days, because people who are like-minded in purpose are also not that far apart when it comes to doing problem solving. So that's basically how we launched the legislation in the Senate. There was a counterpart in the House. It had a Democratic author, liberal Democrat, and it had a very conservative House member. They moved the House side, we moved the Senate side, and it became the Americans with Disabilities Act. And one of the reasons was, and probably the highlight of, for those of us who remember those days or think about those days, the highlight was when the president's closest advisor, policy advisor, who was his lawyer, came to the committee and said, President Bush, the new president, wants you to pass this legislation. Because it's the Democratic Senate, Democratic House.
So when somebody asks you, so Senator, what do you want your legacy to be in terms of significant legislation that you were part of? Where does this one rank?
This is right near the top. I mean, I've been fortunate enough because I got right on the Finance Committee, and then I was on HELP, and I was on an Environment Committee.
Yep,
if I look at the environmental issues, my stamp is on so much of that. So it wasn't just the passage of legislation, it was conquering a difficulty that didn't have to be there or exist. Climbing over those business people who objected to the provisions of the ADA that affected them. Climbing over the people who say, I was able to work with the people like Ted Kennedy and Bob Dole on our side and You know, I can go through a name of people, and that's the heartbreak for those of us that I talk about here. And when I talk about the ADA, or I talk about George Bush, or I talk about Ronald Reagan, or you know, anybody in my time, and the members of the Senate, and the members of the House, who were, I not only had to get along with them, but we both shared the idea of the possible. You know, I'd have to identify a problem in a way in which we could all agree on a solution, and you go for it, whether Democrat or Republican. Clean Air Act also passed the same year as the ADA, for example, and they're busy
You
trying.
had a good year.
Yeah, it was a good year. It was a good year because you had a Republican president and a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. Just think about that, 30 years ago. That's what it was. So I went to the signing over at the White House on the lawn, and the memory from that, of course, is that as we were all gotten our seats and so forth out on the lawn in front of the White House, the band struck up "Hail to the Chief" when President Bush started walking out. And what I remember was half the crowd shouting down in front. You know, that's a memory. You know, and it says it all. I think it answers the kind of question you're asking me. Down in front, you know, to all these people with their disabilities and all these great senators and congressmen and so forth. Down in front. And somebody would say, well, that means get out of my way or something like that. No, that's today's context. In the context in which I lived, it was literally, recognize me. I'm just as happy about being here as you are. Give me a chance to take a picture or whatever the case may be. So in a way, yes, on the 26th, that's the kind of memory I will have, but it will reflect back on the opportunities that I had to find people like me who are willing to take care of the needs of all these people. That's why the political parties themselves have to change in order for this to be the good old days when we identified a problem, sought solutions from people that we didn't always agree with, found common ground, and rejoiced in the good opportunity we'd been given by ordinary folks that couldn't do what we were doing.